They gave me table 9, not the head table, where my son Marcus sat in a charcoal suit that cost more than my first car, beside his wife Vivienne in a bronze dress that caught the candlelight as though it had been engineered to. Not table 2, where our oldest family friends had been seated, the Hendersons from next door, Ruth Bailey, who had taught beside me for 20 years, Pastor Okafor, who had spoken at Raymond's funeral and still called me every April to make sure I was all right. Not table 3, where the school board administrators sat, the people who had shaken my hand that very morning at the formal farewell and called my career distinguished, who had stood and applauded while I carried a box of books out to my car. Table 9. Back left corner of the Magnolia Room at the Riverside Country Club, nice near enough to the kitchen's swing door that I could hear the clatter of plates going out and coming back, count the servers moving through on their rotations. Far enough from the podium that the microphone wire wouldn't reach if someone thought to bring it to me. The tablecloth was ivory, the same as all the others. The centerpiece was white dahlias and pale green hydrangeas in a low hurricane vase, the same as all the others. A candle, a folded program on ivory cardstock. To any stranger walking through the room, nothing would have looked wrong. But I am 68 years old. I have spent 4 decades in classrooms, reading the rooms that teenagers think they're hiding. I understand the grammar of where people are placed. Table 9 was not an oversight. Table 9 was a sentence. My name is Clara Josephine Whitmore. Yet for 41 years, I taught English literature at Jefferson High School in Millbrook, Ohio. Dickens and Morrison and Hurston and Baldwin and the particular kind of Steinbeck that even reluctant readers found their way into by March. I loved that work. I chose it every morning for 4 decades. On the evening of September 13th, the people who share my last name gathered 212 guests in a room draped in ivory and pale green to celebrate the end of it. I want to tell you about that evening, about what my grandson Oliver whispered to me at 7:52 p.m., while I sat alone at table 9 with a plate of overcooked sea bass and a glass of water that the server had refilled twice without being asked. 6 words. 6 words that arrived like a hand placed quietly over a chess piece, stopping a move that had taken months to set up. But to understand what those 6 words protected, you need to understand what was in that room that no one at the head table knew was there. If this story is already finding its way under your skin, hit that like button and subscribe to Margaret Reed. And drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. She always said the ones who stay quiet longest know the most. Let's see if that's true. Raymond Whitmore built things with his hands before he built them with his name. He was 22 years old the summer I met him, working residential renovations with his Uncle David, patching a neighbor's roof on a Saturday morning in July when I was on my way to the library. He called down from the ladder, not the kind of call you ignore. He's not careless, but something more deliberate. He asked what book I was carrying. I held it up. Zora Neale Hurston. He said he'd heard of it. I asked if he'd read it. He said not yet. I told him he should. He appeared at the library 3 hours later, with his work gloves still folded in his back pocket. We married in 1978. I taught school. He built things. In the beginning, it was just the 2 of them. Raymond and his Uncle David, with a second-hand truck and more ambition than capital, taking residential renovation contracts in Millbrook and the 2 counties east. Then it was Raymond and 3 employees, then 6, then the first office with a name on the door, then larger contracts, commercial properties, institutional work, the slow accumulation of a reputation that earns its own momentum. By the time our children were in high school, Whitmore Construction Group had 30 employees and 4-state reach. By the time Marcus graduated from Ohio State and joined the company, it had doubled. By the time Raymond and I began having the quiet, practical conversations that couples who have been married 35 years have, about the future, about structure, about what things will look like after, Whitmore Construction had 140 employees, offices in Ohio, Kentucky, and Georgia, and a name that carried weight in 3 industries. In 2009, at the recommendation of our estate attorney Howard Payne, Raymond and I established CJ Holdings LLC. The name was Raymond's idea, my initials. He said, "I want it in your name because you are the one who held everything together while I was out building." I told him he was being sentimental. He said he was being accurate. We argued about this mildly for approximately 10 minutes, the way couples who have been married long enough to argue comfortably about things they have already decided. Then I signed the paperwork. The structure was clean and straightforward. Raymond held 39% of Whitmore Construction Group personally. Marcus held 20%, a stake built over the years in careful increments as Raymond's signal of trust. "Here, son, this piece is yours. You've earned it." Priscilla held 5%, a smaller gift made at her wedding, more gesture than governance. The remaining 36% was held by CJ Holdings LLC, which I owned entirely. Sole member. One signature required for any decision. When Raymond died in April of 2018, of a heart attack at 66, 3 weeks after his birthday, and 1 day after he had called me from a job site in Columbus to say he'd be home by 7, and he was thinking maybe we should go to Portugal in the fall. When Raymond died, his 39% transferred to me directly under the terms of our estate plan, exactly as Howard had structured it, which meant that I, Clara Josephine Whitmore, retired schoolteacher, the woman eating overcooked sea bass at table 9, while 200 people celebrated her life in the other direction, held 75% of Whitmore Construction Group, 3/4. A controlling majority, as unambiguous and legally precise as any number in any corporate document. Marcus knew I had inherited a share of the business. Raymond had been honest about that much. But the exact architecture, CJ Holdings, the combined percentage, the fact that his mother's single signature controlled 3/4 of a company that now carried a valuation of $75 million, this was something Marcus had never examined. He had never requested a breakdown from Howard. He had never asked me to sit down and walk through the estate documents with him. He had moved into the seat of leadership after his father died, naturally, with the confidence of a man who believes the seat was built for him, and the people around him had allowed that movement to continue uncorrected, including me. I had my reasons. The first reason was grief. Real grief, the kind that makes ordinary things difficult. For months after Raymond died, I could not always remember what day it was. He was in every room of that house. See, he was in the way the kitchen smelled on Sunday mornings, and the way the light came through the bedroom curtains, and the thermostat always set 2 degrees warmer than I would have chosen, because Raymond ran cold, and I had spent 20 years of marriage adjusting to it, and then spent the first winter after his death, realizing I no longer knew what temperature I actually wanted. I needed time before I could think clearly about a company. Marcus stepped into the operational seat. He did it reasonably well. I let him. The second reason was the reason that teachers understand better than most people do. You learn more about a person by watching them move freely than by directing them. If you want to know who your students truly are, give them unstructured time. Give them space where they believe no one is watching. Step back, be quiet, sir, and observe what they become when the corrective eye of authority is removed. I gave Marcus 6 years of that space, 6 years of believing the company was entirely his, 6 years of running it without interference from the woman at table 9, who, he assumed, simply trusted him with the business side because she always had. I watched what he became. What Marcus became in those years was not a cruel man. I want to be careful and fair. He worked. He grew Whitmore Construction in ways that Raymond would have recognized and respected. Strong hires, expanded contracts, a government infrastructure bid pending approval that represented the largest single project in the company's history. He had his father's instinct for the shape of a project, the ability to look at a space and see what it wanted to be. He was good at what he did. What Marcus also became was someone who had quietly forgotten that anything was watching. The language changed first, not all at once. Gradually, the way a current redirects slowly, and you only notice when you look back at where you started. My company, my team, my firm, what I built. Raymond's name appeared in Marcus's conversations less and less, and when it did, it appeared in the past tense, in the category of foundation, the beginning, the starting point, while Marcus was the present, the active force, the reason for everything that currently mattered. I noted this. I said nothing. Then decisions began to be made without me. Not the operational decisions. Marcus had authority over those, and I had ceded them willingly. But strategic decisions with structural consequences. Conversations about the company's direction that would eventually affect what my 75% was worth. A conversation about a potential acquisition offer that I learned about not from my son, but from Howard Payne's paralegal, who mentioned it in passing during an annual portfolio review, as though I must already know about it. I did not already know about it. I noted this too. Said nothing. Added it to the list. Vivienne, I will describe with care, because Vivienne requires precision. She married Marcus 8 years ago and came from her father's world, Gerald Castellano's medical billing company in Cincinnati, built on the gap between what services cost and what can be quietly captured in the space between invoice and payment. Gerald Castellano was a man who understood financial structures the way some people understand languages, fluently, instinctively, with an eye for the gap between what is written and what is meant. Vivienne inherited this fluency. She brought to Whitmore Construction and to my son's life the kind of attention that identifies value before announcing an intention. In the first year of the marriage, she reorganized the company's vendor contracts. This was genuinely useful, and Marcus was grateful for it. In the second year, she began attending the quarterly strategy meetings, which Marcus said she found interesting. In the third year, Raymond died, and in the space that opened up, the operational gap, the emotional gap, the gap where a patriarchal center had been, Vivienne moved precisely and without hesitation. She took control of the household. Not my household. I had my own house in Millbrook, the house Raymond and I had bought in 1989, and I was clear and consistent about its geography. But Marcus and Vivienne's house, which had been Marcus's house before her, which had been shaped by 2 decades of his preferences, and his furniture and his routines, this she reorganized. Not cruelly, methodically. The way you reorganize a space when you have decided it belongs to you. The domestic indignities were specific and consistent, and I will tell you about them because specificity is the only honest way to describe this kind of thing. 2 years after Raymond died, I visited for Christmas. My usual guest room, the larger room with the east-facing windows, the room I had stayed in at every previous visit. The room Marcus and I had always called mine without discussion, had been given to Vivienne's parents. She mentioned it the way you mention a logistical decision that has already been made and is not actually open for discussion. I was in the back room, the narrow bed, the neighbor's fence visible through the small window. I set my bag down and looked at the fence for a moment and thought, noted. The company's annual contractor dinner that winter. My seat was at the far end of the long table, beside Marcus's operations manager's wife, a kind woman named Donna, with whom I had nothing in common, and with whom I spent 2 hours discussing her kitchen renovation. The seat at Marcus's right, where wives of consequence sit, where I had sat at every company dinner while Raymond was alive, was Vivienne's seat now. She had not taken it dramatically or announced the change. She had simply sat there, and no one had said anything different, and so it remained. The summer I arrived for a Saturday morning visit, a standing date we'd kept for 2 years, coffee and the back porch, a tradition I had thought was mutual, and found 4 of Vivienne's tennis club friends in the kitchen, a brunch gathering apparently organized for that same Saturday. Vivienne was warm, perfectly warm. Clara, come in, have some coffee, we're just finishing up. I sat on the edge of the kitchen that had once been mine in the way that matters, the kitchen I had cooked Thanksgiving dinner in for 15 years, and I drank my coffee while 4 women I didn't know discussed a trip to Barcelona. I finished the cup, I said goodbye. I drove home. Then the mentions of Silver Meadows Continuing Care Community began. Marcus brought it up first the spring before last, on a Sunday phone call, casually, the way you mentioned something you've been thinking about for a while and are testing the atmosphere. Beautiful facility. I've heard really good things. You wouldn't have to worry about the house. I hadn't said I was worried about the house. He mentioned it again 2 months later, slightly more specifically, again in the fall, with a price point softened into a reference, not as expensive as you'd think, and a brochure that arrived in my mailbox the following week with a post-it note in Vivienne's handwriting. Thought you might like to read more about this. No pressure at all. I kept the brochure. I placed it in the lower left drawer of my desk, behind the green folder, where I kept everything I needed to remember. The entrance fee was $420,000. I noted the number. I noted that Marcus had never, in any of these conversations, mentioned where that money would come from, or asked me what I thought, or treated the question of where I would live as something requiring my actual input. I noted all of it. I said none of it. Let me tell you about Oliver, because Oliver is the spine of this story. He is 14 years old, nearly 6 feet, all angles and quiet eyes, and the particular attentiveness of a child who has grown up in a house where paying attention was the only reliable navigation tool. He was 3 years old when Marcus and Kelsey divorced. He has lived primarily with his mother in Columbus since then, but since he was 10 years old, he has spent most of his school breaks closer to my house than to his father's, which is not something that was formally arranged, but which developed the way true things develop, because it was honest and because we both knew it. We cook together on Sunday afternoons when he visits. I taught him his great-grandmother's chicken soup, the kind made with proper stock and bones, and the patience to let it come to itself slowly without interference. He taught me that there is apparently a correct way to hold a phone while taking a photograph, and that I had been doing it wrong for years, holding it landscape when portrait was correct, at a distance when close was better. We argued pleasantly about this for several Sundays. He was right. We have been reading Moby Dick together since June, a chapter at a time, usually on the back porch, with whatever I'm serving that afternoon. He says he finds it slow and overly concerned with whales. He keeps showing up for the next chapter. I believe he will understand it fully by the time he is 30, which is the correct age to understand Moby Dick. Oliver has his grandfather's instinct. He stores what he notices. He does not comment on everything he observes, which is the mark of someone who understands that observation is more powerful than reaction. He is the most accurate reader in a family that has learned, over 6 years, not to look at things too closely, which is why, at 7:52 p.m. on September 13th, when I saw him navigating through the tables of the Magnolia Room toward me, moving with that particular forward lean of a tall boy who is walking toward something with intention, I set my fork down. He sat in the empty chair beside me. He looked at my plate, looked at the head table, where Marcus and Vivienne were engaged in a conversation with a man I had not been introduced to. A man in a charcoal suit with the specific confidence of someone who has been brought somewhere because his presence represents something, and who knows it. Then Oliver looked back at me. He was chewing the inside of his cheek. Raymond's habit, precise and unmistakable. The party had been building toward the private dining room all evening. I had noticed this the way I notice most things, quietly, without announcement. I had arrived at 6 p.m. as requested. Marcus met me at the entrance with a hug and a glass of champagne and steered me to table 9 before I'd had time to read the full seating chart, which told me he'd thought about the possibility that I might want to. He wasn't cruel about it. He was efficient. There is a particular variety of dismissal that wears the costume of practicality, and Marcus had always been fluent in it. Priscilla appeared at my table around 6:30 with a champagne flute and a guilty brightness in her eyes that I recognized. The brightness of a person who owes something and has decided warmth is the currency that settles it. She asked how I was doing over here, the here placing me precisely. I said I was fine. She squeezed my hand and returned to the head table, 2 former students stopped by during the salad course and told me what I had meant to them, which were the 2 conversations of the evening that felt like anything real. One of them, a young man named Deshawn, who had been in my honors class in 2009 and was now finishing a law degree, said, "Mrs. Whitmore, I think about what you taught us about Baldwin at least once a week." I held his hand for a moment and thought about a 16-year-old boy who used to sit in the third row and argue with everything, beautifully. The man in the charcoal suit had arrived at approximately 7 p.m. Vivienne had greeted him at the entrance with the practiced warmth of someone greeting a professional associate at a social event. Warm enough to look like friendship, precise enough to be business. She had touched his arm once, briefly, and tilted her head toward the private dining room in a gesture so small that I might have missed it if I were not the kind of person who watches small gestures. I was the kind of person who watched small gestures. At 7:40, Vivienne stopped at my table, set her hand on my shoulder in the particular way that signaled she was about to ask for something. "Clara." She corrected herself immediately. She sometimes called me Deborah when she was distracted, which I had never fully understood. "We're doing the speeches in a few minutes. After that, we have some paperwork for you to look over. Just for the estate planning. Howard thinks the timing makes sense while everyone's together." She smiled with the precision of a woman who has rehearsed a sentence and is delivering it as though she hasn't. "Of course," I said. "Whenever you're ready." She gave my shoulder a small, satisfied press and returned to the front of the room. I sat with the phrase, "just for the estate planning," and felt the exact shape of it. The way it was designed to sound routine. The way routine is the costume that significant things wear when they need not to be examined. Oliver sat down at 7:52 and looked at me for a moment with that held, urgent expression that did not belong on a 14-year-old's face. "Grandma." He leaned in, close enough that the band could not carry the words 3 feet in any direction. "Don't sign anything tonight." I picked up my water glass, took a sip. 15 seconds. Raymond's rule. The one he gave me in the early years of our marriage. When something matters, take 15 seconds before you speak. The seconds save you from the thing you'll regret and give you time to find the thing that counts. "What did you hear, sweetheart?" He told me about Thursday afternoon. Practice ending early. The house quiet. Behind his father's office door not fully latched. Marcus on the phone, and the name on the other end. Gareth, just Gareth, no last name, which I filed immediately. A transfer, company ownership, the documents already prepared. Tonight is the right time because there will be witnesses. And then, she'd sign it because she always trusted him with the business side. Oliver's jaw worked. The cheek. Then Vivienne's voice, even and precise. "She doesn't understand the structure anyway. She never has. She signed what his father put in front of her for 30 years. This will be the same." Oliver looked at his hands on the table. "There was one more thing," he said. After that, Vivienne had said, "Once she signs, we can move forward with the Castellano offer." I set my water glass down. Castellano, her father's company in Cincinnati, which Howard's paralegal had mentioned 6 weeks ago during my annual portfolio review, mentioned casually as a piece of industry news, not understanding yet that it was a piece of news I needed. Gerald Castellano, who had spent 40 years understanding the gap between what things are worth and what people are willing to sign away, had pivoted his company in the past 2 years from medical billing into commercial real estate and construction acquisition. The man in the charcoal suit near the head table. I looked at him. He was looking at his phone, but when Vivienne touched Marcus's arm and tilted her head almost imperceptibly toward the private dining room door, he looked up immediately. The look of a man who has been waiting for a signal. $75 million? I had heard Marcus say the number in July. I standing on the back deck on a Sunday afternoon with his college roommate. I had been in the kitchen heating water for my tea. He had not known I was home. I had noted the number, filed it in the category of the company's current valuation, and thought nothing more specific about it at the time. Now I thought something specific about it. If I signed what they had prepared tonight, if I transferred my ownership stake to Marcus, framed as a gift, an estate planning simplification, a practical measure for a mother who, as Vivienne had told someone in August, in a voice just above a murmur at a family dinner, really doesn't follow the business side of things anymore. Whitmore Construction Group would have a clean majority owner. Ready. Available. The man in the charcoal suit would have what he had come to buy. $75 million. Flowing away from the woman at table 9. I reached over and took Oliver's hand. His fingers were cold. "You did exactly right," I said. I watched his shoulders release slightly, the way the body releases when it has been carrying something and someone has finally taken part of the weight. "Does anyone know you heard them?" He didn't think so. "All right." I kept my voice even, warm, the voice I used with students who had just told me something important and needed to feel that the telling was safe. "Go back to your table. Sit with Harper. Be normal. Talk. Look at your phone. Don't watch your father any differently than you would otherwise." "Can you do that?" He nodded. He was afraid and working to contain it, which is a particular thing to watch in someone you love. "One more thing." I squeezed his hand once, firmly, before releasing it. "See what you just did tonight. What you chose to do. Your grandfather would have been proud of you. I need you to know that." Oliver blinked. He straightened in the small but visible way of a boy who has been told something that settled something. He stood, adjusted his jacket, Raymond's instinct, that physical gathering of composure, and made his way back through the tables to his seat. I watched him sit down, watched him pick up his phone with the careful casualness of a teenager instructed to act natural. He managed it reasonably well. Then I turned back to my plate. Vivienne's tribute ran 4.5 minutes. She is always precise with time. Her praise was generous in the way surfaces are generous. It gives you what you see, and the structure underneath is doing something else entirely. Clara has been the heart of this family for 40 years. We could not have done any of this without her. She looked at me when she said it. Her smile was exact. 200 people applauded. I applauded too. I watched the man in the charcoal suit applaud as well, glancing up from his phone, performing the required attention with the efficiency of a man who knows when to look engaged. Marcus spoke for 7 minutes. He used the word corner twice. Not metaphorically, not accidentally. He used it the specific way that means the place where we put things we want to have available, but do not want at the center of the room. I noted it both times, without expression. Priscilla spoke for 90 seconds and cried, which was real enough to be sad. Then dessert arrived, a small lemon tart, precisely plated. I ate mine slowly and deliberately, or because it was the best thing I'd been offered all evening, and because I was thinking. At 8:23, Marcus crouched beside my chair with the expression of a man who believes a thing is nearly done. "Mom, Howard's here. We thought we'd step out to the private room. Get those documents sorted. Just a few minutes." I looked at my empty plate. "Of course," I said. "Give me just a moment." He patted my hand and walked back toward the front of the room. I took out my phone, typed carefully, holding it below the table. "Howard, I know you're here tonight. Before anything gets shown to anyone, I need 5 minutes with you alone. No Marcus, no Vivienne. The corridor outside the East Coat room. Tell them you need some air. Don't read this where anyone can see the screen. Sent. Phone face down on the table." Then I opened my clutch and removed the 3 index cards I had prepared. My remarks, written in longhand, the ones I had never been given time to deliver. I turned the first card to its blank side. At the top, the date, September 13th. Below it, 2 words. What I know? I borrowed a pen from Brennan, my server, who appeared as though he had been waiting to be useful. He was working toward a graduate degree in English literature. He had a small silver bookpin on his lapel. He produced the pen immediately, the way people who are actually prepared for things do. I thanked him. Then I began to write. There are 2 kinds of power. There is the kind that announces itself, that places itself at the head table, that delivers speeches, that puts other people in corners. And there is the kind that has been patient. My son was about to discover the difference, and the evening was not over yet. I have been in rooms that wanted me to panic. Corporate boardrooms in the early 1980s, when I was the only woman at the table and also the only one who had read the contract all the way through to page 47, where the language changed in a way that would have cost our school district $200,000. Hospital waiting rooms in the spring of 2018, sitting with a cup of coffee I did not drink, while a doctor whose face I still see clearly told me that Raymond had not survived. Difficult rooms, both of them, the kind built around the assumption that you will respond to the pressure in the room by becoming smaller. I have learned across 68 years that panic is a choice. It is the choice to let what you feel organize what you do. And what you feel, in moments of genuine danger, moves faster than what you need to think. So you slow yourself deliberately, you breathe, you decide consciously not to allow your heart to run the room. I folded my napkin, set it beside my plate. I picked up my clutch and stood from table 9 with the unhurried movement of a woman who is simply ready to find out what the evening has in store. That was the only performance I gave all night. The Magnolia Room was noisy with the particular sound of 200 people settling into the later part of a party, voices rising as champagne refilled, the band finding something slower and warmer. I moved through it without speed, stopped twice. Once for the Hendersons, who were leaving early for Margaret's knee. Once for Deshawn, my former student, who held my hand with the seriousness of a young man who has learned something about gratitude. I told him he had changed his own life. He shook his head. We disagreed pleasantly. It was the last warm conversation of my evening. From my peripheral line of sight, I saw Marcus watching me from the head table. He said something to Vivienne. She turned slightly to track my movement across the room. I did not change my pace or my expression. I nodded at the school board chair and kept walking toward the entrance hall. The door to the east corridor was off the far side of the cloakroom. I pushed through it and let the sound of the party seal itself behind me. Howard Payne was already there. He was standing against the corridor wall, arms crossed, a silver pocket square catching the hall light. He is 71, built narrow, with the kind of careful face that comes from 40 years of listening to people say things they will later wish they had phrased differently. He had been my attorney for 22 years. He had been present, legally speaking, at every significant financial decision Raymond and I had ever made. He had drafted the CJ Holdings documents with his own hands. He was also the man who had apparently prepared documents tonight at the request of an attorney he had never met, on the representation that he was acting with my full knowledge and consent. "Clara," he said. He said my name the way people say names when they are not sure how much trouble they are in. I went straight to it. "Howard, tell me exactly what's in the documents." He pulled a folder from under his arm, held it for a moment, then handed it to me. I opened it. 4 pages. The header, Assignment and Transfer of Membership Interests, CJ Holdings, LLC, to Marcus Raymond Whitmore. Beneath it, language I recognized immediately, because Raymond and I had read versions of this same language together in this same attorney's office 15 years ago, moving in the opposite direction. CJ Holdings, LLC, as sole member, hereby assigns, transfers, and conveys all membership interests, rights, and obligations pertaining to Whitmore Construction Group, Inc. to Marcus Raymond Whitmore. All membership interests, the 36% held by CJ Holdings, the 39% inherited from Raymond, all 75%, wrapped in language designed to read as routine, as administrative, as the kind of estate simplification that prudent aging adults arrange before things become complicated. A signature line at the bottom, Clara Josephine Whitmore, grantor. Blank. I looked up at Howard. "Who prepared this?" He cleared his throat. "The attorney Marcus retained. A man named Bellamy out of Cincinnati. He contacted Howard's office 3 weeks ago. He said he was coordinating on my behalf. He said I had discussed this with him. I have never spoken to anyone named Bellamy. Howard was quiet for exactly the length of time it takes a careful man to absorb the full weight of what has just been confirmed. I know that, he said. I understand that now. I looked at the document in my hands. Is there anything in here bearing my signature? No. Good. I handed the folder back to him. Nothing is done yet. Now I need you to do something. What do you need? I need you to be clear with me, and with yourself, that your professional obligation in this matter is to me, not to Marcus, not to the business, to me. If that is something you can commit to fully, without division, I need to hear you say it tonight, in this corridor, before I decide what the next hour looks like. Howard had practiced law for 4 decades. He understood exactly what I was asking, and exactly why I needed it, said aloud. He looked at me steadily. Clara, you have always been my client. Raymond first, then you. That has not changed. Then here is what I need from you. I kept my voice level and unhurried. Go back in, find Vivienne or Marcus, and tell them you've had a chance to look at the documents and you want 48 hours before anything gets signed. Standard practice for a transfer of this magnitude. They won't be able to argue against it without making their urgency visible. He nodded. And you? I'm going to make 2 phone calls. Then, I'm going back in. Howard looked at me for a moment. The recalibrating look. The look of a man who has spent 22 years thinking he knew what kind of woman he was working for, and is discovering, in a corridor at 9 p.m., that he only knew part of it. If Bellamy misrepresented to me that he had your authorization, he said carefully, that is not a civil matter. I know. I'll need to document everything from tonight. Document everything from tonight. I said it back to him as confirmation, not instruction, but give me the 48 hours first. He straightened, smoothed the front of his jacket, went back through the door. I stood in the corridor alone, listening to the muffled sound of 200 people celebrating my life from the other side of a wall, and then I took out my phone. My financial advisor's name is Douglas Park. He is 53, precise, the kind of professional who returns calls within the hour and reads the full document before commenting on it. He has managed the investment portfolio attached to my CJ Holdings stake for 11 years. He is also the only person in my professional life who calls me Mrs. Whitmore without being prompted, which tells you something about the quality of his attention. I called his personal number. He answered on the 3rd ring, awake, at home, not expecting to work. He said, Mrs. Whitmore, just my name. The economy of a man who knows when a call isn't casual. I'm sorry to call this late. I need to begin a restructuring of CJ Holdings. I kept my voice low. Nothing moves tonight. I'm not authorizing any transfer of any kind tonight, but I need the architecture of a new holding entity drafted before Monday morning. And Douglas, I need a timestamp on the initiation. Tonight. Do you understand why? A pause. The specific pause of a man doing quick math. Someone tried to move your stake. Someone prepared documents tonight for my signature, transferring full ownership of CJ Holdings to my son. The documents were prepared by an attorney named Bellamy in Cincinnati, who told my attorney he was acting with my knowledge and consent. He was not. The second pause was longer, the kind where a person is thinking about implications, not just facts. I'll have the architecture drafted by Sunday evening, he said. Mrs. Whitmore, I need to tell you something. Last Thursday, I received a call from someone who identified themselves as a representative of your estate. They asked about the liquidity options attached to your CJ Holdings position. I absorbed that. What did you tell them? That I would need to speak directly with you before discussing anything of that nature. You did exactly right. What name did they give? He told me. I made a note on the second index card. Texted him. Save everything from that call. Written summary by Monday. He replied within a minute. Already done. I hung up. Stood for a moment with the phone in my hand and the party noise filtering through the wall. Then I made my second call. Dr. Patricia Hollis is a retired family court judge who has lived 3 houses down from me for 14 years and who plays chess on Tuesday evenings with a focus that borders on absolute. She received my call at 9:07 p.m. without preamble and said, "Tell me what you need." I told her the outline in 4 sentences. She said, "The name given to your financial advisor." If that was Vivienne Castellano Whitmore, using her pre-marriage name to gain access to your financial information, that is identity fraud, not breach of contract, not an estate dispute, criminal fraud. That's what I thought. Clara, you'll want everything documented and time-stamped before you do anything else. A certified letter from Howard's office to all parties, outlining tonight's timeline, signed and dated. Make it impossible for anyone to argue later about when you knew what. I'm already building that. A pause. The kind between two women who have known each other long enough not to fill every silence. "Go do what you need to do," she said. "Call me tomorrow." If this story has found you, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story from Margaret Reed. The best ones are still coming, and the people who watch to the end are exactly the ones who need to hear them. I took 30 seconds in the corridor before going back through the door. Not because I needed to steady myself, I had not lost my steadiness, but because 30 seconds, in my experience, is precisely the right amount of time to let a room begin to wonder about you. Ye long enough that they've started to speculate, not long enough that they've sent someone to check. I walked back through the entrance hall at the pace of a woman who has nowhere particular to be. The Magnolia Room had thinned slightly, guests retrieving coats, early departures, the social geometry shifting toward its end. The band had quieted. The head table was partially empty. Marcus was not in the room. Vivienne was not in the room. The man in the charcoal suit was not in the room. The private dining room door was ajar. Warm light through the gap. The quiet register of a meeting in progress. I touched the pearls at my collar. Not nervousness, but the gesture of a woman grounding herself in the specific person she is before she walks into a specific room. Then I pushed the door open. The private dining room held a round table, 6 chairs, a low centerpiece that echoed the main room's aesthetic. 4 people were already seated: Marcus, Vivienne, the man in the charcoal suit, and a second man I had not been introduced to who had an open briefcase on the chair beside him, and the expression of someone who spends his professional life explaining documents to people who did not write them. Howard had not yet arrived. I had not expected him yet. Marcus stood when I entered. The gesture landed strangely in this context. Courtesy dressed over something else. He pulled out the chair across from him, with the ease of a son who believes he is managing a situation. "Sit down, Mom. We're just getting started." I sat. I folded my hands on the table. So the man in the charcoal suit extended a hand across the table with the practiced warmth of someone accustomed to rooms where things change hands. "Gareth Castellano. I've long admired what your family has built with Whitmore Construction, Mrs. Whitmore." I shook his hand. "Thank you." "And which part of the family are you connected to?" A fraction of a pause. He understood the precision of the question. "Through Vivienne. She's my sister." I looked at Vivienne. She held my gaze with the trained warmth she had been wearing all evening. "We thought it made sense," she said, "given the circumstances, to have Gareth present tonight, since we'll be moving forward together." Moving forward together. I noted the phrase. The second man introduced himself. Jeremy Bellamy, from the Castellano Group's legal division. He was already moving a copy of the document toward my side of the table. "Your attorney reviewed this earlier this evening," he said. "We understand he has some procedural questions. He'll join us shortly. In the meantime, please feel free to read through." I read through. I read slowly, as I have always read documents, from the beginning, without skipping, through to the last notation on the final page. There is a particular kind of hubris in the people who prepare documents they believe won't be read carefully. It shows up in what gets buried on page 3. I read page 3 twice. The room was quiet while I read. Marcus was quiet. Vivienne was quiet. Gareth Castellano sat with his hands folded and his expression pleasant. And Bellamy annotated something on his own copy that appeared to have no immediate purpose: the performance of industry, designed to fill the silence of waiting. I finished. Set the document down. I have some questions, I said. Of course, Marcus said. He was relaxed. This was proceeding as he had arranged it to proceed. The schoolteacher version of his mother, he believed, was sitting across from him with her reading glasses and her pearl clutch, about to ask something he would be able to explain. What is the effective date of the transfer? Bellamy. Tonight upon execution. The transfer becomes effective at the moment of signing. And what happens to the operating agreements currently held by CJ Holdings? He paused. Those would be absorbed into the new majority ownership structure, meaning they would need to be renegotiated. I watched his face as I said it. The existing vendor agreements, the subcontractor frameworks, and the government infrastructure bid currently in final review, all of which are structurally attached to CJ Holdings as the majority controlling entity, would require formal amendment following any ownership transfer. A longer pause now. Technically, yes, but the process would be: is the infrastructure bid currently active? Mom. Marcus, reaching for the tone that means you're overcomplicating this. Is the bid active? I asked again. Same register, same quiet. Yes. He said it tightly. We're in the final review stage. So a change in the majority ownership entity during the final review stage of a federal infrastructure bid would require disclosure to the contracting agency. It would likely require the agency to pause review and conduct an administrative evaluation of the new ownership structure. That's a technical consideration our team would. I understand who would handle it. I kept my voice completely even. I'm asking whether it was disclosed in the drafting of this document, because the document I'm holding does not mention it. Bellamy looked at Gareth Castellano. Castellano looked at Vivienne. The room had rearranged itself in a way that rooms do when someone has said the specific thing that cannot be unsaid. Marcus said, Mom, this is a state simplification. You're making it sound more complicated than it is. It is exactly as complicated as it actually is, I said. No more, no less. The door opened. Howard came in, took the remaining chair. C set his folder on the table with the deliberateness of a man who has decided to be helpful in a particular direction, and looked around the room. Howard, I said, I've been asking about the implications of this transfer for the federal bid. That's exactly the first thing I wanted to address, he said. Gareth Castellano cleared his throat, adjusted his position. When a man like that adjusts his position, something has shifted in his calculation. Mrs. Whitmore, he said, his voice carefully recalibrated to reasonable. I understand you may want additional time. I want to be transparent with you. The acquisition offer we've extended. I turned to Marcus. What acquisition offer? I said. The silence was absolute and immediate. Gareth Castellano looked at Marcus. Marcus looked at the table. Vivienne's right hand, which had been resting beside her water glass, made a small involuntary movement and then went still. There has been no acquisition offer extended to me, I said. My voice was the voice I use when what I am saying is simply accurate, and I need it to land accurately. I am the majority shareholder of Whitmore Construction Group. A valid acquisition offer requires my knowledge, my consent, and my participation in any letter of intent. Marcus said, Mom, I was planning to— When? I asked. After I signed this? He looked up. The easy, unchallenged expression that had moved through the evening like a man who has arranged things and expects them to proceed as arranged, that expression had changed. What was underneath it was more complicated. It was not simply guilt. It was the particular look of someone who has, for the first time in a long time, looked at the space between what he believed and what is real, and found the gap wider than he expected. I wasn't lying to you, he said. His voice was lower now. I just thought— You thought it would be simpler, I said, if I had already signed. He did not answer. That was the answer. I turned to Bellamy. You represented to my attorney that you were acting with my knowledge and consent in preparing these documents. I said it without heat, without theatrics, simply as a statement of fact that was going to be relevant to him shortly. That was not accurate. I would recommend you document precisely what you were told, and by whom, before you speak to anyone else this evening. Bellamy had gone very still. Howard said, "I'll be following up with you on that directly, Jeremy." The room was quiet. I stood. I took the document from the table, folded it once, precisely, and placed it in my clutch. "I'm keeping this as documentation of what was presented to me tonight," I said. "Howard will be in contact with all parties within 48 hours. If there are legitimate estate planning steps to be taken, real ones, properly structured, we will take them properly, with full disclosure of all relevant information and all relevant parties." I looked at Marcus for a moment. He was looking at the table. "The guests are still here," I said. "It would be appropriate to say goodnight to some of them." And I walked out. I drove home alone through 22 minutes of dark October road. Marcus called twice before I reached the end of the country club's driveway. I let both go. Vivienne called once. Patricia Hollis called, briefly. And I answered that one. She said good when I told her I had the document, and then call me in the morning, and hung up. The drive home was quiet, no radio, just the engine and the empty fields, and the particular interior stillness I have cultivated in moments when the body needs to understand that the decision has been made, and the work now is not deciding but doing. I thought about Raymond, not about the documents, not about the number $75 million, or the name Gareth Castellano, or the blank signature line I had not filled. I thought about Raymond standing at the kitchen sink on a Thursday evening in 1994, washing his hands after a late site visit, telling me about the building he was working on. Not the specs, not the contract numbers, but the building itself. What it would become when it was finished. The people who would use it. The way it would stand in 20 years, in 40, after the people who built it were gone. He cared about what lasted. I thought about what he would have said about tonight. And then, I thought, he would not have been surprised. He was a man who understood, quietly and without bitterness, that the things you build carefully are tested by the people who inherit them. He would have been sad. And then he would have been precise. And then he would have done exactly what I was about to do. "See who they are," he used to say. "Then decide what to build." My kitchen, at 10:42 p.m., smelled like the chicken and rice I had made before the party. I reheated a bowl, sat at the table, took out the legal pad and wrote at the top of a new page, what was confirmed tonight. Marcus had signed a letter of intent with Castellano Group, representing himself as the controlling owner of Whitmore Construction Group. He does not hold controlling interest. He holds 20%. The representation in the letter of intent was false. Gareth Castellano is Vivienne's brother. The acquisition is not an independent transaction. It is a family arrangement. The Castellano Group is purchasing the company for the benefit of Marcus and Vivienne Whitmore, clearing the full enterprise value, $75 million, to them directly. An individual identifying herself as Sienna Whitmore, Vivienne's pre-marriage name, contacted Douglas Park and attempted to extract information about the liquidity of my CJ Holdings position. This constitutes identity fraud. Attorney Bellamy represented to Howard Payne that he was acting with my authorization. So he was not. This may constitute fraud upon an attorney and upon the court of public record. The transfer documents were designed to read as estate simplification. They were not simplification. They were the elimination of my ownership. I looked at the list for a long moment. Then I turned the page. What I do now. I wrote 6 lines, numbered them. The last 2 were names with times attached. Howard Payne, first thing Monday. Douglas Park, architectural filing completed by Sunday evening. At the very bottom, a single line in larger letters than everything above it. The bid disclosure. This was the piece that the evening had handed me that I had not expected when it started. The government infrastructure bid, the largest single project in Whitmore Construction's history, the one Marcus had worked 2 years to secure, was in final review. Any change to the majority ownership structure of the contracting entity required disclosure to the federal contracting agency. This was not a technicality, this was a requirement. Marcus had signed a letter of intent with a buyer while a federal bid was pending, without disclosing it to the contracting agency. He had done this as a person who did not hold controlling authority over the company he was representing. These were not the actions of a man making an estate planning error. These were the actions of a man who had decided he owned something that he did not own and had moved it accordingly. I capped my pen. Monday arrived gray and deliberate, the kind of October light that requires a lamp even in the morning. I was at the kitchen table by 6:30 with my tea and my legal pad. By 7, I had sent Howard a time-stamped summary email, the full sequence of the evening's events, in order, with every name, every phrase I could recall verbatim, the time of every conversation. By 7:15, I had forwarded Douglas Park the text exchange from Saturday night and confirmed that the restructuring architecture was complete. By 7:30, I had written a letter, formal, 4 paragraphs, the kind of language that is designed to be read once and remembered, addressed to Jeremy Bellamy at Castellano Associates Legal Division. It informed him that any future contact regarding Whitmore Construction Group or CJ Holdings was to be directed to Howard Payne exclusively, and that I was preserving documentation of the representations made to my attorney without my knowledge or consent. I sealed the letter, set it by the door. Then I sat back down and opened the green folder. The estate documents. The originals, not copies. I spread them on the table in front of me, and I read them again. Not because I did not know what they said, but because there is a specific quality of attention that comes from reading a document you understand fully, in a context that has made it new. The CJ Holdings structure, clean and deliberate. Raymond's 39%, transferred to me upon his death. The precise legal architecture of 40 years of partnership. My name on every relevant page. Clara Josephine Whitmore. Raymond had put my name at the center of everything. Quietly, without performance, in documents that spent 40 years in a drawer, while our family moved around them like furniture they'd stopped seeing. He built things to last. I touched the words on the last page. Then I picked up my phone and dialed the number I had been deciding about since I drove home Saturday night. The call I made that Monday morning was to the Ohio Secretary of State's office, specifically to the division that handles corporate filings and ownership documentation. I asked what I needed to ask. I was given what I needed to be given. I hung up, made a note on my legal pad, and looked out the window at the gray morning. There is a particular kind of invisible move that looks like nothing from the outside. No dramatic gesture, no confrontation, no speech. Just a woman at a kitchen table on a Monday morning in October, making a phone call that would, in approximately 3 weeks, walk through a door that my son expected to open into a negotiation and find something entirely different on the other side. I had been seated at table 9. I had thanked the server, eaten my lemon tart, said goodnight to the people who deserved it. And then, in a corridor and a kitchen and a Monday morning, I had begun. My son was across Millbrook, beginning his week. He did not know what I had done with mine. He would know soon enough. For 3 weeks, I did not speak to my son about what had happened. He called. I answered. I was warm and specific and interested in exactly the things I have always been interested in: how the Henderson project was progressing, whether the Georgia team had resolved the subcontractor issue Marcus had mentioned in August, whether Oliver's sophomore swim times were improving. Marcus answered these questions with the particular wariness of someone being asked ordinary things by a person who he suspects is no longer behaving ordinarily, and whose definition of ordinary he has realized too late that he never fully understood. I did not mention the meeting, did not mention the documents, or the man in the charcoal suit, or the specific name Sienna Whitmore, that had been given to my financial advisor on a Thursday afternoon by a woman who had been Vivienne Castellano before she was Vivienne Whitmore, and who had apparently decided that her pre-marriage name was useful for certain transactions. I was not performing calm. I was calm. There is a difference, and it took me many years to understand it fully. Performance requires effort. Real calm is simply the state of someone who has made her decisions and is now executing them, one Monday at a time, without wasted motion. In those 3 weeks, Howard Payne sent a certified letter to Jeremy Bellamy at Castellano Associates Legal Division. 4 pages, dated, signed, comprehensive, documenting the events of September 13th in chronological order, naming the specific misrepresentation made to Howard regarding my authorization, and notifying Bellamy's firm that the matter had been referred to the Ohio Bar Association for professional conduct review. Howard told me later that Bellamy called within 2 hours of receiving it, that Bellamy had not fully understood, when Marcus's people first contacted him, what the actual ownership structure was, that he had been told, and had believed, that the transfer was a routine intra-family formality already agreed to by all parties. I am willing to believe Bellamy was deceived. I am not willing to ignore that a competent attorney has an obligation to verify. In those 3 weeks, Douglas Park completed and filed the restructured CJ Holdings 2. The timestamp read Sunday, September 15th, 8:47 p.m., 2 days after the retirement party, before any competing filing, before any argument about who had moved first. The architecture was clean, properly documented, filed with the Ohio Secretary of State's office in a form that could not be disputed. And in those 3 weeks, I filed a notification. The federal contracting agency managing the infrastructure bid received, on Monday, September 16th, cite a written notification from Clara Josephine Whitmore, majority owner of Whitmore Construction Group, advising of a material discrepancy in the ownership representation accompanying the original bid filing. Specifically, the bid had been filed with Marcus Raymond Whitmore, listed as the primary ownership authority. The accurate majority controlling entity was CJ Holdings, LLC, with Clara Josephine Whitmore as sole member, holding 75% of Whitmore Construction Group, Inc. The agency placed the bid in administrative review pending verification of ownership documentation. I did not tell Marcus. I folded the copy of the notification, placed it in the green folder behind the estate documents, and went to make dinner. Oliver came on a Sunday afternoon in the second week of October, the way he had been coming on Sunday afternoons for 4 years, arriving at the back door without ringing the bell, which is the particular privilege of people who belong somewhere and know it. He set his swim bag in the hallway, found me at the stove, said, "The soup smells right." "It is right," I said. He washed his hands at the kitchen sink, Raymond's instinct appearing in a teenager's hands, which still stops me sometimes in the way that certain continuities do, and then he sat at the kitchen table and watched me work. We did not immediately talk about the retirement party. That is one of the things I value most about Oliver, the understanding, built over years of Sunday afternoons, that important things do not need to be inserted into conversations. They wait. They arrive when the space is right. He asked, "Seth, eventually, how is it going?" "The way these things go when they're being handled correctly," I said. "Are you okay?" I thought about how to answer this honestly, which is the only way I know how to answer Oliver. "I'm better than okay," I said. "I'm prepared." There's a difference. He turned this over in the careful way he turns things over. "What's going to happen to Dad?" I looked at him. He was looking at his hands on the table, the posture of someone asking a question he is not entirely sure he wants answered. "Your father made choices," I said. "Real consequences follow from real choices. That's not punishment. That's just the actual shape of things." I paused. What happens next depends on what choices he makes from here. The door is still open. He has to decide whether he walks through it differently. Oliver was quiet for a moment. Grandpa always said you were the smartest person in any room, he said. He said it when you weren't there, like it was just a fact that he wanted people to have. I turned back to the stove. He was right about most things. We ate the soup at the kitchen table, just the two of us, and talked about his swim times and his English class and a book he had picked up from my shelf on his own. Not Moby Dick, which we had finished, and which he said turned out to be about considerably more than whales, but something different. James Baldwin. He had found it the way you find books that are ready for you, without looking for them specifically. Did you put it where I'd see it? He asked. The shelf has been in the same place for 30 years, I said. You found it. He smiled. Raymond's smile, the one that starts in the eyes before it reaches the mouth. I'm slow and without performance, impossible to mistake for anything other than what it is. I thought, whatever else has happened in this family, whatever needs to be repaired or released, this is what remains. This is what lasts. Howard called on a Tuesday morning in the third week of October. The agency has completed its preliminary review, he said. They want to meet. Schedule it. Clara, they're going to ask about the nature of the discrepancy. Whether the misrepresentation in the bid filing was intentional. I know. If Marcus is found to have willfully misrepresented ownership in a federal bid. Howard, I said, schedule the meeting, and make sure all relevant parties receive notice. He scheduled it for Thursday, October 24th, at 10 a.m. His office, the glass-walled conference room on the fourth floor overlooking downtown Riverside. He sent formal notices to Clara Whitmore, Marcus Whitmore, representatives of Castellano Group, and the compliance officer from the Federal Contracting Agency. He told me, later, that Marcus called him within an hour of receiving the notice, asking what the meeting was about. Howard had said, estate and governance matters, and a compliance matter regarding the federal bid. Marcus had said, what compliance matter? Howard had said, Thursday at 10. I arrived at Howard's office at 9:30. The conference room was already arranged. 8 chairs around a long mahogany table, water glasses, the atmosphere of a room where someone has prepared carefully for a conversation that matters. Howard was there. So was the attorney I had retained 3 weeks earlier. Sandra Osei, 47 years old, corporate law specialist, the kind of precision in her work that showed up in her documents and in the way she organized a table before a meeting. She had reviewed the full ownership and bid structure in 4 days and delivered her summary on a Saturday morning. 12 minutes, every relevant angle, no wasted words. Also present, Leonard Graves, compliance officer from the Federal Contracting Agency. He had driven 2 hours from Columbus and had the particular composure of a government official who has seen this situation before and would prefer not to write another report about it if the matter can be resolved cleanly. I sat at the head of the conference table, not the side, not the end near the door, the head. The chair from which meetings are run. Howard sat to my left, Sandra to my right. Leonard Graves sat across from Sandra and opened his folder. We waited. At 10:02, the door opened. Marcus came in first. Dark jacket, no tie. The casual confidence of someone who had told himself this was a routine meeting, a negotiation, a room where his 6 years of operational leadership would establish his position before anything else had the chance to. He was followed by Vivienne, precisely put together as always, in a gray jacket that communicated nothing. Behind them, Gareth Castellano, who entered the conference room, registered me at the head of the table, and became, in the fraction of a second it takes to understand something, a different kind of presence than he had been on September 13th. Marcus looked at me. He looked at Sandra, whom he didn't recognize. He looked at Leonard Graves, whom he also didn't recognize. He looked back at me. Mom. The word arrived with the specific weight of a man who has just understood that the room is not what he prepared for. Good morning, I said. Sit down. The pause was 4 seconds. I counted. In those 4 seconds, Marcus stood in the doorway of a conference room he had come to manage and understood, with the slow and heavy clarity of consequential things that he was not managing it. He sat. Vivienne sat beside him. Gareth Castellano, after a moment that was long enough to be visible, sat at the far end of the table. Howard said, "Thank you all for being here. We'll begin with the ownership documentation." He placed a set of documents in the center of the table. Official copies. The CJ Holdings operating agreement, the estate transfer, the current ownership breakdown. He spoke for 8 minutes, thorough, economical, presenting what was simply real in the order that made it comprehensible. CJ Holdings, LLC. Sole member, Clara Josephine Whitmore. Holding interest, 36%. Estate transfer, April 2018, from Raymond Whitmore to Clara Josephine Whitmore. Interest transferred, 39%. Combined holding, 75% controlling interest. Marcus Raymond Whitmore, 20%. Priscilla Ann Whitmore, 5%. Howard set the final page on the table. Mrs. Whitmore holds a controlling majority interest in Whitmore Construction Group. Any acquisition, structural transfer, or ownership change requires her written consent and authorization. Gareth Castellano looked at the breakdown document with the expression of a man who has been handed information that changes the mathematics of something he believed was already decided. He looked at Vivienne. Vivienne was looking at the table. Marcus said, "I have been running this company for 6 years." "Yes," I said. "My father left it to me." "Your father left you 20% of it," I said. "He left me 75%. He made those decisions deliberately, and he made them in full knowledge of what he was doing. He and I structured this together, over many years." I looked at my son across the table. "You never asked to see the full documents." A silence. "I didn't think I needed to," he said. "I know," I said. "That is the problem." Leonard Graves cleared his throat. He had been sitting with his folder open. He was patient, the practiced patience of a government official who understands that his moment arrives at the right time and not before it. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, "on behalf of the contracting agency, I want to acknowledge first that we appreciate your proactive notification of the ownership discrepancy." He turned to Marcus. "Mr. Whitmore, the bid filed by Whitmore Construction Group on March 14th lists you as the primary ownership authority of the contracting entity. The bid documentation represents, specifically, that you hold majority controlling interest." Marcus said, "I run the company." "You operate the company," Leonard said, "without heat." Operational authority and ownership authority are distinct designations under federal contracting regulations. The majority ownership of the contracting entity must be accurately represented in all bid documentation. He paused. "The agency is conducting a review to determine whether the misrepresentation was willful." The word willful settled into the center of the conference room. Marcus's jaw tightened. "I wasn't misrepresenting anything. I genuinely believed I was." "I know you believed it," I said. He looked at me. "I'm not saying you set out to commit federal bid fraud," I said. "I'm saying that you proceeded for 6 years as though you owned something you did not own, without reviewing the documents that would have told you otherwise, and that the consequences of that are now real and require real management." I turned to Leonard. "I'd like to walk you through the corrected ownership filing and discuss the path to restoring the bid to active review." "That's exactly why I'm here," Leonard said. We spent 40 minutes on the bid documentation. Sandra presented the corrected ownership filing. CJ Holdings, LLC, as the majority entity, Clara Josephine Whitmore as sole member, all supporting corporate paperwork attached and certified. Leonard asked questions. Sandra answered them. I answered too directly, when the questions required decisions only I could make. Marcus sat across the table and watched his mother run a meeting about the largest contract in the history of the company he had believed he controlled. He said nothing for 40 minutes. At one point, Gareth Castellano spoke. "Mrs. Whitmore." His voice had lost the particular ease it carried on the night of the party. Something more careful had replaced it. "The acquisition offer, Is not something I'm pursuing, I said. The offer was $75 million. I know what it was. I looked at him across the table. I also know what this company is, what it was built from, what it took to get from a second-hand truck in 1979 to a federal infrastructure contract in 2024. $75 million is a number. The company is not a number. Gareth looked at Vivienne. The specific look of a transaction that has arrived somewhere it was not supposed to arrive. The letter of intent, Sandra said, with the calm efficiency of someone stating a fact, was executed by a party who did not hold the authority to execute it. It is void. If Castellano Group wishes to pursue a legitimate acquisition at a future date, the appropriate parties and the appropriate process would need to be engaged from the beginning. She paused. Mrs. Whitmore has made her current position clear. Gareth Castellano closed his laptop. He gathered his documents. He stood, said something quiet to Marcus that I could not hear across the table, and left the room. The door closed. Vivienne stood a moment later. She looked at me across the table, not with the polished warmth she had deployed all evening at the party, not with the professional composure of a woman who has arranged things. She looked at me with something that was closer to real. A brief, unguarded moment. Something underneath the surface finally surfacing. I worked for this family, she said. I put years into that company. Real years. I know you did, I said. And I meant it. And you just... I protected what was mine to protect, I said. What you put in was real. What you tried to take was not yours to take. Those are two different things, and you were the one who decided to combine them. She left. The door closed behind her. Sandra and Leonard stepped out briefly, the professional tact of people who understand when a room needs to become smaller. And then it was just Marcus and me. He sat with his hands flat on the conference table, looking at them. He was 44 years old, and he looked, at that moment, younger than I expected. Not in a soft way, in the way of someone who has lost the thing they had organized their understanding of themselves around, and who doesn't yet know what they are without it. Did you always know? He asked. About the ownership structure? Yes. And you let me run it. 6 years. I let you show me who you were, I said, with the company and with me. He looked up. Mom, Marcus. Nah, my voice was steady. Not cold. I have no interest in coldness. But clear, the way things need to be when they are simply true. I'm not angry with you. I want you to understand that clearly. What I am is clear-eyed. There is a difference between the son I raised and the man who sat across from me at a retirement party with documents he wanted me to sign without reading. I want to know which one I'm talking to. He was quiet for a long time. I thought you'd be fine, he said finally, the voice of someone confessing something he has been carrying. I thought you had enough. The house, the retirement income, the school. I thought the company was more practical for me, more. You thought you had the right to decide what was enough for me. Silence. What happens now? He asked. Seeing I placed Sandra's folder on the table between us and slid it toward him. Howard is finalizing a governance agreement, I said. It establishes what should have always existed. You hold operational authority. You run the company. Hiring, contracts, expansions, the day-to-day management of everything that makes it function. That's yours. But any acquisition, any structural decision, any matter of ownership or major capital requires my written consent. I looked at him steadily, the way they always legally required it. He opened the folder, read the first page. I'm not removing you, I said. I'm establishing the actual terms. The ones that were always real but never enforced, because I was patient and because I believed, for longer than I should have, that you would eventually look at the documents and understand what they said. And the bid? The bid is being restored. If the agency awards it, it will be the largest contract in Whitmore Construction's history. I paused. You built the proposal. You put the team together. If the work gets awarded, it gets awarded on its merits, But it will be awarded to the company as it actually is. He nodded. Just once. The nod of a man receiving terms he knows are fair, even if the fairness cost him something he had mistaken for his. I'm sorry, he said. The words arrived quietly, without production. Just 2 words said to the table. Then he looked up and said them again. I'm sorry, Mom. And this time his eyes held them. Not performance, not strategy. Something that had been held down by 6 years of assumption and comfort, and the particular blindness of a son who had confused his mother's patience for permission. I looked at my son. I know, I said. That's where we start. Priscilla came to Millbrook on a Saturday in November. She drove from the airport alone, without being asked, which told me something had shifted in her own reckoning. She arrived at my kitchen door. The back door, the informal entrance, the one that means something. And she sat at my table with her coat still on for a minute, before she remembered to take it off. We had tea. And then she asked the question I had been expecting. Did you always know? About all of it? About the ownership structure? Yes. About what Marcus would try to do with it? I held my mug. I hoped I was wrong. Were you wrong about anything? She asked. I thought about this honestly. I was wrong to wait as long as I did, I said. I told myself I was being patient, giving people room to show themselves. But there's a version of patience that tips into allowing what shouldn't be allowed. I held it too long. I looked at her. And I should have told you the full picture earlier. You deserved to know what you actually held. Priscilla was quiet. She wrapped both hands around her mug the way she has done since she was a child. The gesture of someone who needs the warmth of the thing before she can speak clearly. What can I do? She asked. Stay, I said. Not for an estate, not for a reason that's about money or inheritance or what happens to the company. Just stay. Be here, in the actual life of this family, not only the financial parts of it. She cried. Not the party tears. Something different. The tears of a person who has seen something true about herself and is not putting up a defense against it. I'll try, she said. That's enough, I told her. That's exactly where you start. On a Thursday morning in December, a certified letter arrived from the Federal Contracting Agency. I was in the garden. The November roses had been cut back for winter, but the garden, in its dormant state, still asks for attention, still rewards the person who gives it. I heard the mail truck, walked to the front of the house, took the envelope from the box. The letterhead was official. The language was formal and specific. I read it standing at the end of my driveway in my garden gloves. Following review of the corrected ownership documentation and the updated representation of Whitmore Construction Group's majority controlling entity, the agency has determined that the bid submission meets all qualifying requirements as amended and is pleased to award the contract for the Route 7 infrastructure renovation project to Whitmore Construction Group, Inc. I folded the letter, stood at the mailbox. The December light was low and pale, the particular winter light that arrives at an angle and makes ordinary things look precise. The garden behind the house. The roses, dormant but not gone. The bench at the far end that Raymond built the 3rd year of our marriage, that I have kept where he placed it, that I sit on in the evenings when the weather allows. I stood at the mailbox for a long moment. Then I went back to the garden. I called Marcus that evening. I read him the relevant portions of the letter. On the other end of the line, I heard him breathe, a long, slow breath, the kind that comes at the end of something that has been held for a very long time. Mom. His voice was different from the conference room, different from the party, different from the son who had put documents in front of me and called them simplification. Thank you. Thank your team, I said. They built the proposal. The work earned the contract. You made the call that saved the bid. I corrected a misrepresentation, I said, which was the right thing to do. For the company. A pause. For the company, he repeated, hearing something in the phrase. And for me? I looked out the kitchen window at the dark garden. The company is still Whitmore Construction, I said. Your name is still on the door. Your father's name is in the foundation of every building it has ever put up. We haven't finished deciding. You and I, what this family looks like from here. But we are still deciding. I paused. That's something. That's where real things start. Yeah, he said. That's something. Oliver came for soup on the second Sunday of December. We had started a new book. He had found it himself on my shelf, the same way he had found Baldwin. Willa Cather, my Antonia. He said he wasn't sure why he'd picked it. I told him that was the right reason to pick a book. We sat at the kitchen table with our bowls and took turns reading paragraphs aloud, the way that makes language sound different than when it lives only in your head. Oliver read a passage, set the book down, and looked at me. Grandma? Yes. Do you think it's going to be okay? With Dad? I considered the question the way it deserved. I think he's deciding. Han, I said. I think deciding is where it starts. Whether he gets to okay depends on what he decides next. I've left the door open. What he does with that, that's his. I paused. I've spent enough of my life deciding things for the people in this family who were capable of deciding for themselves. Oliver nodded. And you? I'm already okay, I said. I was okay on September 13th, sitting at table 9, eating overcooked sea bass, while 200 people were told I was the heart of a family that had put me in a corner. I looked at him. I knew what I was. I knew what I held. I was waiting for the right moment to let them know it too. Oliver looked at me the way he looks at things he is storing. Were you scared? He asked. No, not even a little. I thought about the corridor at the Riverside Country Club, the document in my hands, the drive home, the kitchen at 10:42 p.m., with the legal pad and the chicken and rice, and the particular internal stillness of a woman who has made her decisions. I was sad, I said. There is a version of your father that I raised and that I believe in, the man he became in the years between Raymond dying and September 13th. That man made choices I cannot explain away, and it's sad to know that about someone you love. I looked at Oliver. But sad is different from scared. Sad means it mattered. Scared would have meant I didn't know what I was doing. He was quiet for a moment, sitting with it. Grandpa was right, he said finally. You are the smartest person in any room. I picked up my spoon. Your grandfather was a man who built things with his hands before he built them with his name, I said. And he was wise enough to know that what you build matters less than who you build it with. I looked at my grandson, 14 years old, Raymond's eyes, the moral backbone of this whole story. He built it with me, and he was wise enough to make sure I could keep it standing after he was gone. Oliver smiled, small and warm and exactly right. You did, he said. Yes, I agreed. I did. It is February now. I sit at my kitchen table in the early morning with my tea and the particular winter light that comes through the east window at this hour. Lower than summer, more deliberate. The kind of light that rewards the people who are already up when it arrives. On the table in front of me is not a legal pad, not a list of what I know or what I need. It's not a document requiring a signature or a letter requiring a response. It is a letter I am writing to the Jefferson High School Scholarship Committee. I'm expanding the Raymond Whitmore Memorial Scholarship, increasing the annual award from 2 recipients to 5, adding a category for first-generation college students from Millbrook and the 2 surrounding counties. The endowment is fully funded. Howard finalized the documents last month. Douglas Park has the investment structure in place, clean and properly built to outlast all of us. 11 students in 6 years, sent to college with Raymond's name beside them. Now 16, then 21. Then more, as the years do what years do. I sign the letter with my full name, Clara Josephine Whitmore. Then I fold it into an envelope. Noah write the address in the handwriting that 41 years of writing comments in the margins of student papers will produce. Careful, practiced, the handwriting of someone who believes that the way you write a word says something about how much you mean it. And I set it by the door to mail. Outside, the garden is still. The roses are dormant. But underneath the dormancy in the root systems that Raymond planted in the second spring of our marriage, and that I have tended through 4 decades of winter and bloom. Underneath the surface, the decision to return is already being made. It happens without announcement, without drama, quietly, in the dark, in the way that the most important things happen. He built things to last. He was right about that. And so, as it turns out, was I, the woman they placed at table 9. The woman they handed documents to sign, confident she would sign them, because she always had. The woman who finished her lemon tart, borrowed a pen from the server, who was working toward a graduate degree in English literature, and began to write. The woman who held 75% of everything in a green folder in a drawer, and who knew, had always known, exactly when the right moment was. She always said the ones who stay quiet longest know the most. She was right about that, too. Thank you for staying all the way to the end. The people who finish the whole story are the ones who understand it, and the ones who share it. If this one moved you, the next video on your screen is waiting to do the same. And if you haven't subscribed yet, come back. There's always another woman the world underestimated. And we tell those stories here